All right. I guess this is how it would work. If you're watching a video, you're going to comment on it. You show your picture in the bottom right corner. And this is how you would start a video.
Shaping our society. It's only been the last 10 years that people have made the presumption that it's self-evident that what we live in is a patriarchy. What women haven't contributed? Is this...
What is a patriarchy, really? I think what people are talking about is they're only seeing power if it comes from what men tend to be good at, and they're disregarding what women are good at and saying that isn't power. But men, generally speaking, are better at material earnings, material value, making money, for example. Whereas women and men also have they can give spiritual value in the case of philosophy, but women tend to be much better in providing the spiritual value to individuals, especially at all different ages, but especially at young ages. And because of the indirect nature of that spiritual value that you're giving, it's not, you can't easily monetize that in the material world. First of all, it's not very scalable. Second of all, people don't pay for indirect value in that sense. I mean, what's your child going to do? Pay you $1 million for giving them love? I mean, that's not how the economy works. But there are things of value that can't be measured with money. And if you're maybe a leftist or a Marxist, they only see material value. They don't. They focus on money, and they see money as, for lack of a better word, power. I don't know if power is the right word because that can have different meanings, but I mean, it's a source of ability. It's a source of productivity. It's where you you call it a gift that you have, but
Is this the point we're making?
pause it. But there's nothing, and they're trying to say that that's wrong. That what, because men tend to specialize in that's a patriarchy. Well, if that's your definition of a patriarchy, then the very existence of men in and of itself is a patriarchy, because that's what men are. And I think if you have an anti-capitalist mindset, the first thing you're going to want to attack is the men. Because if you can, well, it gets much more complicated. There's more they can say. Let's see what else they say.
Is that women haven't contributed to our society. They just weren't there until...
Women haven't contributed to our society before 1965. Well, women before 1965, I believe they were working a lot less for money and working more for our future in preparing the next generation for being healthy and happy and all of the spiritual things that you need for society to last long term and not decay and degrade, which is in many ways what's happening to our society for multiple reasons. Some of them that have nothing to do with that, many of them philosophical. But actually, I would say the philosophical reasons probably led to the taking away of the women from providing what they're so good at. And while I'm on that topic, just because a woman may specialize in doing work that doesn't pay money, as in being a mother for, say, a few decades of her life, which may be her 20s and 30s and maybe early 40s, that doesn't mean that she can't then refocus her specialization into working primarily for money. women can do statistically can do things just like men can do. They may not be as specialized in some of those areas statistically, but even if they can, it's still a trade-off, because the man cannot give birth to children. The man cannot necessarily give that nurturing as well as a woman. May not want to spend the time with the woman, with the child as much. Whereas he may be more focused on global outcomes, large societal impacts, where as a woman may feel more drawn to the individual level impacts that you get with the one-on-one contact and dealing with people. And both of those are important. And being drawn to something makes you better at it because you're going to spend more time at it. But conversely, you tend to be drawn to the things that you also have a natural aptitude for. So either reason can be justification, but also they self-reinforce in each other in a feedback, so they build very well. So anyway, I mean, I mean, let's listen some more.
Till what, 1965, and all of a sudden they took their place. All the women before that weren't doing anything at all. It was all patriarchy.
You don't feel that globally men have the better end of the stick?
No.
Okay, so men have the better end of the stick. You know, I'll tell you, there's a lot of what men do out there, at least if we're talking about the traditional roles, a lot of what men do, they're working for corporations and jobs that may not be very fulfilling in many cases. I mean, most people are not happy with their jobs, and there's probably a lot of reasons for that. I think a lot of it has to do with the lack of freedom in a society, because then you get great inefficiencies with how much you have to work, what you have to work, your options, how much your cost of living is. It all goes up, so you end up doing a lot of things you don't want to do. But at least in a more traditional role, a woman may be able to spend time with a child at the home, have a lot of autonomy and freedom, whereas the man does not have autonomy and freedom. Yes, she has to take care of the child, but generally, especially in the way things are run today, I mean, you're not given a lot of autonomy to do your work and come and go as you please. Generally, you have to essentially sell yourself for a number of hours every day. They don't respect your time and your freedom to deliver as you see fit. As long as you do deliver, they don't manage with a timeline and say, this is the timeline, we're going to check in. That's the proper way to manage. But rather, the lazy way to manage is say, I want you to stay here 8 hours a day, whatever happens. That's the lazy way to manage. It's not focused on the business. But anyway, that's very disrespectful to the men. In some cases, yes, that is necessary. You cannot get away from the sort of time-locked behavior of certain jobs. But time and location, whatever, locked. But, trading time for money. But the woman, at least, I mean, hopefully you have a happy child you can deal with, a child that you can raise well, that'll be well behaved and give you a lot of enjoyment. But potentially there's a lot of autonomy there, and the man can be paying for your housing during those years while you're taking care of the child. They can be paying for your food. You can have a lot of freedom as a woman, potentially, especially during those years, at least until, maybe the age of when you start getting into your 40s, you're probably no longer having children. Hopefully by that time you've had at least 3 children, more than 2, because, you want to grow a society, you want to grow a civilization. There's 2 people it takes to have a child. So obviously, if you want to grow You need more than two. So that's just basic sense. Let's watch some more.
Well, no, I don't believe that globally men have the better end of the stick. Like what? I don't understand why people would even begin to conceptualize the world that way. Better in what way?
Roles of power in businesses, politically, men pretty much rule the world, no?
Well, what about in warfare?
See, he's trying to make the abilities of men and women about sort of power or almost coercive control. And of course, leftists, Marxists, Trotskyists, whatever, they see the business as sort of a coercive control. They see economic forces as coercive control. To some extent, I do sympathize because, as I said, and they often use phrases like wage slaves and things like that. And to some extent, I do sympathize. But to the extent that there's dissatisfaction, I don't blame that on self-interest, on profit seeking. I don't see the solution as taking away freedom. I see the solution as giving more freedom. And that's freedom based on the principle of the freedom to reason and act on your judgment and individual rights. Whereas they think somehow by violating those rights, once you understand those at a fundamental level, you're going to give the person, in essence, more freedom or more happiness, or at least some of them, or at least to some extent, some of them don't even care about that. The more modern ones, they simply want equality and egalitarianism. They don't care if it causes more poverty, more suffering, more disease, more destruction, mass murder, whatever. They just want people to be more equal. Anyway, they're essentially nihilists, and that it gets really bad. Some of those people, I mean, whether you get into the environmentalist movement, you get into all that stuff, where many of those people, either the leaders overtly or psychologically, internally, are essentially hell-bent on exterminating the human race. It gets bad. But anyway, let's continue.
What about in dangerous jobs? Who gets killed in war? Who fights in war? Men.
You have women who are soldiers in the army nowadays.
Yeah.
It's opening more and more.
Yeah.
So Jordan is trying to take the position of, men have good things, but there's also downsides. I brought up the positives of some of the upsides of the traditional women's roles, that whereas Jordan brought up some of the downsides of the roles of men, such as obviously, you're fighting in the military, and he's implying that, I guess, that's a very risky job. And he goes on to mention later that it's a risky job. And it's strange the other guy brought up, women in the military. I mean, generally, the men are going to be your better fighters in a society. No matter what we're talking about, whether it's races or sexes, I think it's always important not to, the term I use is commoditize people. You don't want to treat people as a commodity. You want to look at people as individuals. And of course, there will be women who are great warriors at fighting enemies, destroying. Great for them. I mean, they probably have more of a warrior spirit than I do, at least when it comes to either the hand-on-hand battle combat and what. I'm more of a philosophy of war and strategy guy. I'm not interested in, I don't think my purpose in life is to be that warrior person. I think I'm much more well-served in other areas where I can do much better. But there may be great warrior women, and they should do whatever makes them happy. Let's continue.
Well, no, we're not going to go down that.
Is a woman soldier not as good as a man soldier?
I don't know.
Is a woman soldier not as good as a man soldier? Jordan says, I don't know. I think that's a little bit of a, Jordan, I think you're being a little bit insecure in asserting some kind of conclusion there. Now, if you properly analyze the question, what did he say? Is a man soldier better than a woman soldier? I mean, there's multiple ways to interpret that. I mean, if we're talking, so you can, I don't know if when we're talking about nouns, if we're talking about the infinitive, but there's a term called the metaphysical. In essence, in other words, when we're talking about the essence of what it means to be a man versus the essence of what it means to be a woman, is one inherently better than the other? Technically and literally, probably. I mean, when we're talking about a man and a woman, we're also necessarily talking about the masculine and the feminine. And you're going to generally get more masculine with men, and you're going to get more feminine with women. So if being more masculine tends to make you a better warrior than A to B to C to D, you can sort of draw a conclusion that chances are, and also, there's different interests. You can be masculine and have very different interests and aptitudes, and you can be born a different way physically and mentally with all sorts of variations. But generally, I mean, you can have a woman with some masculine strengths and different masculine strengths. I mean, you can see some women who are very good with philosophy, logic, engineering, which tend to rely more on things that develop under more masculinization of the brain or the body. Biologically, those things just get enhanced. And so what? I mean, it's a partnership. Just like you've seen the symbol, the yin and the yang, you need the masculine, you need the feminine, and you need all of the things that derive from both of those things. So, but statistically, generally speaking, you're going to have many more men who are interested in being warriors and fewer women. And also probably the aptitudes are going to fall from that, as I explained before. And even if you had equal aptitude, interest is very important. Why would you want women to do something they're not interested in as high numbers? It doesn't make any sense. Let's continue.
Whether a woman soldier is as good as a man soldier. I know that in most armed forces, women aren't placed in high combat frontline positions.
Who is responsible for this?
Briefly, there is also an issue of the front line. I think I've heard that, women are not put on the front line. If they're getting paid the same, getting the same benefits, now we're getting to some really weird stuff, because if the women are held back from the front lines, you get into a lot of ethical issues about, what sort of preferences they might be getting. And I'm not an expert on that, but when I hear things about that, it only makes me suspect that there's some things that just doesn't seem right to me. I don't know. You can have different roles, many different roles in the military, as I understand, but it just makes me wonder. It's something to think about. Let's go. Let's continue.
Masculization of the society.
Feminist groups have a fair bit to do with it, and the radical left types that insist that what we live in is a patriarchal tyranny.
What is the issue with feminists nowadays?
They think that the idea that our culture is a tyrannical patriarchy is an axiomatic truth. Well, I think that's complete nonsense. The insistence that sex, gender identity, and gender expression are social constructions. The insistence...
All right, well, we've got two things there. We've got feminism, then we get into the social constructs. First, feminism, a few things. I'm willing to say, I think that, at least I think this is the easiest and most coherent way to think about it, is that feminism was never about equality. At least, there's two different types of equality. I don't think it was about equality of rights. Then there's sort of the equality in the egalitarian sense. And I don't think it was really even ever about equality in the egalitarian sense fully either, even if it was, that's incredibly destructive, because I mean, you have to sort of destroy what it means to be a man and a woman and do all sorts of social engineering and all of that anyway. But no, I don't think feminism was about equality of rights. I think it many ways co-opted that. And I've heard there's people talk about the, what's it called? The suffragists and the suffragettes. And by the way, those are supposedly two different things, and that's getting into a different subject. But it's very interesting, the history. So first of all, these leftists, Marxists, Trotskyists, whatever, they like to use these historical narratives to justify current political movements. And even if what they were saying was true in the past, which I think is a great distortion of the past, it still wouldn't justify any sort of revenge politics today, which is what they try to use it for. So on both levels, it's incorrect. But my understanding, and I've learned more about this, and I haven't gotten that deep into it, but generally they try to promote these ideas that there was a lot of oppression of women in the past. Or one example, obviously there was the fighting for the women's right to vote. And my understanding is a lot of women didn't want that. There were the feminists, which were sort of the Marxists at the time, and they wanted it. But my understanding is they did not support it until all the responsibilities that came with voting, although they were somewhat loosely connected, such as serving in the military, were removed. So they wanted the benefits, but not the responsibilities. So at the time, voting, I mean, it was different at different times. At one time, it was ownership of land or something, I think, and serving in the military, and then as other people have talked about, they called it bucket duty, which is fire patrol, whatever you want to call it. But these are the things that that person was given the right to vote. And of course, you would become married eventually, because I mean, who doesn't get married? So eventually, I mean, the woman, she would marry a man, and then you would be one vote per family. So it was more per family. Yes, I mean, I guess the man could vote differently than the woman, but then why are you marrying somebody that disagrees with you on anyway? But I mean, I think there's a lot of distortion of history, but even to the extent that it's true, or even if it was true, I mean, it doesn't justify this sort of battle of the sexes that is trying to go on. I mean, we need to be coming together, and that gets into a great other topic of families and family courts and all that other stuff that the feminists leftists, Marxists, all that have established, which are destroying the family, destroying society, making it hell. But anyway, let's go.
Upon that. The insistence then, if there are any differences in outcome, that's a consequence of oppression. That's what's up with them. All of that's complete bloody nonsense.
You have the feeling that feminism has gone too far?
Far too far.
So feminism gone far too far. I think the idea was wrong in the beginning. It's just that if you continue it with a wrong idea, the trajectory is just going to continue wrong. It was along that same path, and yeah, it'll go too far. But the trajectory was always the same. And I can give you another example. For example, let's say the government has many, many laws. Let's say 90% of what the government does is wrong. Well, if you have an anarchist, which is totally opposed to government, you can be an anarchist for perhaps a very long time before you start running into problems if, say, you were to start eliminating all of those government programs. But eventually, because the trajectory itself was wrong, you're going to start running into problems, because now what happens when you start, not only are you indiscriminately removing functions of government, but eventually you're going to be moving more and more to where, most of them are going to be legitimate functions. And then you're just going to keep going. And you can say, well, anarchism's gone too far. Well, actually, the better way of looking at it is anarchism was actually wrong from the beginning. It just people didn't recognize what it was because they didn't analyze they didn't make a deep analysis of the trajectory. They only made an analysis of what was happening at a sort of point by point in time.
But it's the leftist it's not so much feminism, it's really the ideology that characterizes the radical left. Feminism is part of that.
Even though there were still huge inequalities.
What inequalities are we talking about precisely?
Talking about wages.
So the wages thing, I mean, statistically, there's a statistical difference between what men and women earn if you add it all up. But as I said, generally men tend to be better at making money. So you would kind of expect that. You know what? And the other thing is, you know, there is discrimination. You could have discrimination but the thing is, even men don't make the same amount of money. One man compared to another man, there's discrimination. So how do you think if you just pick an attribute like sex and you use the entire population of a country or the world, do you think that it's going to come out exactly equal? I mean, you could pick another attribute as well. You could pick, well, obviously you could do things like race and whatnot, but you could pick like something totally different, like left-handedness versus right-handedness. And you could pick any attribute, and I almost guarantee it's never going to come out equal because, one, there can just be noise in the system statistically. I mean, what's the chance that it's going to be equal? It's not going to be equal. I can't think of a single attribute where you could possibly pick it with a large population. It's going to be equal. You can't even have two people doing the exact same job and they're getting paid equal. Two men, they're probably not going to be paid equal. Either rightly in some cases and maybe wrongly, discrimination, whatever. But men discriminate against other men. Women discriminate against men. Men can discriminate against women. Sometimes it's because of the sex. Sometimes it's not because of the sex. Sometimes it's other things. Sometimes it's negotiating. Sometimes it's, I mean, Jordan gives some of the examples in the past and here, like negotiating, but whatever. Let's go.
Access
the
to
wage gap
positions of
has
power.
nothing to do. The wage gap has nothing to do with prejudice, or virtually nothing to do with it. Single men and women in their 20s. In fact, there's a wage advantage for single women in their 20s. So if there's any gap.
So my personal experience in the workplace was that women were given, at least in some places, were given, at least it appeared that they were given much greater preference. In many cases, they were given promotions at twice the rate of men. And many of those men left the company that were treated that way. The exception, I would say, is that there were a lot of, I'd probably describe them as psychopathic men, which were given the promotions. And then there was also a portion of men that deserved the promotions and were not sort of psychopaths. They were good, honest people. And they received promotions as well. But by that point, you're probably talking about 10% or something like that. The rest, the 90%, were given either to the psychopathic men or to the women based on feminism. So that's going to vary by company, but that is, and by different areas in companies, but that was roughly my observation of the workforce.
At all with regards to wages, it's a gap between people and mothers.
Most of the data in all of the countries, come up to that conclusion, that a woman who has the same position as a man...
Women and men who do the same job, the women end up getting paid less?
Yes.
And you control for everything else? No.
Yes. He's never looked into it. You know, I don't mind people, like, there's one thing I can't stand is when people, and I hope I'm not doing this on anything, because I try to express the degree to I know something and understand it in my certainty. But what I cannot tolerate is people who have strong opinions about things they know nothing about. What causes that is something very bad psychologically. And sometimes you even see this manifest as sort of a pathologic liar, whereas a person will almost, they won't even have an opinion on something, but until you start expressing an opinion on something, suddenly they will generate a strong opinion and act as if they know a lot about it. And we're not just talking about deductions. We're talking about sometimes things that are dependent on facts and situations. The person, they're almost, they're compelled to pathologically lie. It's almost some sort of self-defense mechanism. And I don't think I've ever had that sort of pathology of my psychology or mind, and there's a great insecurity there, and in some ways you could say it manifests in the areas of religion, but it manifests in all sorts of topics. Let's go.
Sorry, the data's wrong. There's at least 16 reasons why men get paid more than women. Men work longer hours.
And by the way, that guy, I mean, it's not like he just generated that himself. I mean, it ties in. I mean, he's just not a very self-aware, self-thinking. He's not using his mind, his brain. He's not autonomous. He's not very individualistic. He got that from somewhere. He absorbed it. He copied it. He repeated it. But he doesn't care if it's true because he's not asserting his self. He's lacking a self. You know, people in religion, they have this term, the soul. But if you were to use that word, perhaps in other contexts, I generally don't like borrowing words from religion because I don't think religion is quite a good thing, and I want to give tip my hat to that credence, whatever the term is. But if you had to give a meaning to having a soul, so having a soul would mean to have a self. And to have a self, one must exercise individuality. Individuality is your reasoning process. So in essence, to surrender your mind is to sell your soul. You could think of it as selling your soul to the devil is becoming a collectivist, subscribing to a dogma, not being an individualist, repeating these mantras of these leftist religions or whatever religions, in essence, is selling. You could liken it to the idea of selling your soul to the devil. In essence, you have no soul. You are a hollow shell. I mean, this is serious stuff here. I mean, when you do, and when you have no soul, you're greatly prone to doing great evil. And you see this in totalitarianism. You see it repeated throughout history. Mass murder on millions of levels, millions of people. Not exercising and taking reasoning and thinking seriously results in all sorts of political, scientific, medical destruction, disease that's not cured. It goes on and on. Anyway, let's try to stay on this topic a little bit. Let's continue.
If you work 10% longer hours, you make 40% more money. Okay, men work in more dangerous positions. So there's a wage advantage for working in more dangerous positions. Men are more likely to move as a consequence of being required to by their job. So men are... there's more.
I understand what you're saying. You're saying that there were many different points that explain why we come up to that final statistic, but that if you look at the reasons why, then it's because men work longer, because they move more than women, and they
work in more dangerous positions. They're more likely
I'll-
to work outside.
I'll take you on that.
They're more likely to work in STEM fields. They're more.
And here's the thing. I mean, these people say the exact, like this interviewer guy, these people say the exact same thing over and over again. They get a response correcting them, but then they go on to, I mean, don't tell me this interviewer guy has never expressed these. I mean, maybe in some cases this is the problem. They've never expressed these views to someone who disagrees with them. But the thing is, if you express something that disagree with and you're countered with a correction, to then go on as if that conversation never happened and keep repeating that stuff, I mean, that's evil. I mean, you're just a drone.
More likely to work in fields where you can scale. If you look and you say, well, on average, women make less money than men, which is also different than saying that they make less for doing the same work, because those aren't the same claims, then you have to say, well, what are the reasons that are contributing to that? You can't just say, well, it's a consequence of gender discrimination, unless you can only think about one thing at a time. And I would say that's another problem with the modern feminists, is they can only think about one thing at a time.
You said in an interview that to stop harassment in the workplace, a good start would be women stopping wearing lipstick.
No, I didn't say that.
He didn't say that. He didn't say that. I remember that interview. I watched that interview. He didn't say that. He put forward some things to think about. And yes, I would like to say some things briefly about makeup in the workplace. One, I think it's something important to think about. Makeup in the workplace. It is a sexual signaling, but I remember from his interview as well. It's hard to divorce sort of attractiveness from sexuality, because looking good in general is good for your self-esteem, and it can actually help you in business, but you're not necessarily. There is a line of where you're trying to use sex to sell. And of course, obviously on marketing and advertising, that's used. But on sort of business to business level, especially in the workplace, I mean, generally, the idea is you're not supposed to be using sex to sell. But the other thing, I mean, the question is, what about men? I mean, do men have something similar? Is wearing a suit, is shoulder, some expressing, well-developed shoulders either through a suit or something, is that similar sexual signaling? That he goes on to talk about the uniforms in this interview as well. That's one way you can sort of hide the body image. But anyway, and I just want to say also, in general, I think women, I would like to see the women not wear makeup. I want to see what they really look like, especially if I'm looking for a romantic partner. I want to see what they look like. I find makeup very off-putting. In some ways, you could say it's almost intimidating, but to the extent it's off-putting because it may be intimidating, but also it's very artificial. And also at the same time, I can't tell if I would actually find that woman attractive because I can't see what they look like. So that's bad. And the other thing is a lot of women are using makeup because they're very unhealthy. A very large portion of men in the population, women, are very unhealthy. They're suffering from being, they have the either premature aging, or the most common is just obesity and being overly fattened. Distorts the face. The body, you can't make out the structures correctly like you're supposed to be able to recognize to signal that sort of, well appealing. So anyway, yeah, I mean, that's that's a little bit more over being explained too much, I guess. But I think we need more people being healthy and not using makeup. And let's stop using makeup in general. Now, if you want to have like a sort of like once you're in a relationship and you want to have like a private time together, yeah, maybe makeup is something you'd want to use, just like you may use certain clothing or other things. But I would like to see, in general, women not wearing makeup in all circumstances, perhaps. At least ideally. I understand that that may just be very bad for some women because they're not in a healthy state. But it's really crazy with the makeup. Come on.
My question is, you were talking about sexual harassment in the workplace.
Yeah.
And you said that one of the issues maybe was women wearing lipstick, because why do they do that? It's to create sexual arousal.
It wasn't an issue with regards to enticement to sexual harassment. It was an issue to what are the rules governing male and female behavior in the workplace. And if makeup is a sexual signal, then why should it be acceptable in the workplace? Well, what the hell do you think makeup is for? Why do women wear red lipstick? Just out of curiosity. Why do they rouge their cheeks?
Because
Why
they
red?
want to feel beautiful?
Look, I mean, the ideas that I'm putting forward here with regards to makeup aren't contentious. This has been studied. We know perfectly well what sexual signaling does, why people wear makeup, why women wear makeup.
When you say these kind of things, a woman may think that, oh, then I might be responsible.
I'm not sure if responsible is the right word. I mean, it's hard to find the right word, but it's, under many definitions of responsible, you're certainly not responsible in the way he means it there. That's for certain. But the idea of should we be limiting the degree of sexuality in the workplace is an important question. And to what extent should we be limiting the sexuality? And to the extent that perhaps we do want to engage with personal relationships with people we meet in the workplace, how do you do that? What are the rules? His previous interview on that topic was asking some very important questions, I think.
For what this guy at the office said to me, because I was wearing makeup, so then I'm the one to be blamed.
That wasn't the point I was making.
No, but do you understand that for a woman watching this and who is a victim of sexual harassment in the workplace,
I don't
things
care
like
about that.
You don't care about what she may feel after she hears you?
No, I don't care. I really don't care particularly what people feel about facts. What are the rules exactly governing the behavior of men and women in the workplace? NBC, no hugging. Okay, that's a rule now. Okay, how about no sexual displays in the workplace? None. How about that for a rule? Now, I'm not saying that that's a rule that we should adopt, but I am saying that if we're going to have a culture-wide conversation about the difficulties of men and women working together, then we better bloody well make sure that we get the rules straight. Now, when the Maoists took over China, they had men and women wear the same uniform. No makeup, same haircuts. Why? To eliminate all of that. I didn't say that if a woman wears makeup, that's any excuse for a man to harass her. I just said that if she's wearing makeup, that's sexual signaling. And that is what it is.
My vision of it is that, in a way, it puts the blame on women and it gives the guys a free pass.
Well, you can interpret it that way if you want, but that isn't how I see it. And that's also not what I'm implying. And I think that it's appalling that women are treated badly in the work.
It's hard to imagine a scenario where wearing makeup in and of itself, one could argue that would give men a free pass. I can't see how that would be any scenario where that would I mean, there's one issue of miscommunication, and if you increase the degree of sexual signaling, are you going to raise the floor for the chance that there will be then some miscommunication that then could lead to some kind of sexual issue? I mean, you're potentially escalating the risk of miscommunication because you're heightening all of those signals. You might say, well, you're putting on the makeup. Everyone's seeing the makeup. The makeup isn't one for one person. But then when you layer on top of any communication that's done, and we communicate typically on an individual level, or often with individuals, because you've raised the floor, it may make it then easier because you've just heightened everything, where a person could misperceive any communication. Now, I'm not saying that would be easy to happen, especially during normal conversation, but this just gives you an idea, depending on what the conversation, depending on the tones, depending on the amount of smiling, where a person might then take the conversation a little bit more somewhere else. And it would never, you don't just jump into kissing someone or anything, but if the conversation were there to escalate a little bit, I mean, you couldn't object to that, assuming it's just a slight escalation, a little bit more in the direction of being more personal in some way. If all, I mean, it's very complicated, and we're talking about scenarios that are not even concrete. But anyway, I understand what he's saying.
Place by like unsophisticated men who have no idea how to govern their impulses.
In a video, you said that the problem with those angry women is that since at the end of the argument you cannot fight physically, you can't really deal with them.
That's not what I said. I said that that's one of the things that keeps conversation between men civil. Women can't argue with angry women. Women are often bullied by angry women.
What I meant was more, you said that, and I'm really like not trying to paraphrase you or to put words into your mouth.
You are trying that directly.
No, it is things that you said that you cannot deal with those.
Yes, but don't tell me that you're not trying to put words into my mouth because you've selected what you're going to ask, and you selected it very carefully with a tremendous amount of forethought.
Well,
there's a purpose for that. What is the purpose precisely?
I am quoting things that you said.
Why? What is it that you're trying to establish?
Because you said that.
I thought we were talking about masculinity.
We are.
No, we're not.
Yes, we are.
How are we talking about masculinity?
Because I'm asking you what you think of men and of women.
So I'm wondering if when he or the producer, whoever called up Jordan, they said, we want to specifically talk about what it is to be masculine. We want to talk about masculinity as if it was going to be highly focused on that particular concept.
Basically what you've been trying to do, I would say, for the last 15 minutes is put me into a sequence of corners by accusing me of various forms of misbehavior. So why are we doing that? What's the point here?
These are things that you said. My job as a journalist is to ask questions about what you represent and the ideas that you defend.
Your job is also to select the things that you might ask about in some manner that doesn't indicate a substantive bias. You picked 3 things to talk to me about in the last 20 minutes that were very carefully selected. Like, why did you pick those things?
Because this is my job.
Because this is my job. Actually, that's probably more true than people realize. In other words, to advocate that particular bias is his job. So it's true. But I think what he meant is, what he was trying to say, the interviewer guy, what he was trying to say, it's my job to select things, but what Jordan was focusing on is why those particular things. And of course, that is the issue. Why did you... So you claim you're just asking questions, but the way you formulate questions and the questions you choose are completely up to you. They're dependent. And I mean, you could call it bias if what you mean is what is the foundation for your questions. And as we know, the left is incredibly dishonest about, they I guess the right, some of them, Fox News, fair and balanced, right? That's kind of stupid. But that's a slogan, but I think they're much more open with the fact of what their beliefs are. But the left pretends to be, we're neutral, we're just objective, we're journalists. Well, no, I mean, be honest about your views, because that is a potential. I mean, at some level, you could call that a bias. I'm not sure. I mean, at least, in some context, the right word is bias. You need to disclose your bias, in essence. I have no problem disclosing my bias. In other words, disclosing what my views are. I have no problem disclosing that because I'm confident in my views. I don't believe I need to deceive people in order to get more people to believe in my views. I don't. And even if you don't believe, you're trying to get people to believe in your views, it's important that you disclose any biases, just like in papers, scientists are supposed to disclose any potential conflicts of interest they can think of, just in case that may have caused a bias. Now, you still evaluate the paper and you evaluate the data and you evaluate the arguments that are presented, but it's good to be aware of any of those other things just in case you might need to dig deeper or anything like that. You should, same thing with so-called journalism. I could imagine, and maybe this is a problem, but where every journalist, they need to disclose their political and philosophical ideology. It needs to be stated somewhere. Otherwise, if you're practicing, if you're publishing in journalism, you're doing interviews, whatever, and you're not disclosing your conflicts of interest, which are your views and your biases. You could say, well, I'm just center. So please. I don't know. Maybe I don't know what the way around that is. Center is not unbiased anyway. It's just a hybrid of two different views that you've selected somewhat arbitrarily. Anyway, let's continue.
No, not necessarily. You could be asking me, for example, why I've spoken to 250,000 people live in the last 8 months. That might be more newsworthy.
Well, we're not going to have a big debate about journalism, but if a journalist doesn't ask the tough questions, how can you give the good answers?
Well, it depends on what the tough questions are. It depends on
I didn't think that they would be tough. We're talking about things that you said. I mean, if it's easier to have conversation between men, because there is this underlying threat, of a physical contact.
I don't think it's easier.
Jordan, he doesn't like this. I don't know if he thought this was going to be a somewhat friendly interview. I mean, to some extent, yes, it's important to go up against people that disagree with you because, that is the battlefield of ideas. But at the same time, I mean, for a person like Jordan to be in the presence of someone like this interviewer, I mean, it's very uncomfortable because Jordan knows that this guy has a lot of evil ideas, and it's physically uncomfortable to be in the presence of someone like that. I mean, it's a horrible thing that the world has this problem. So yeah, I mean, it's a stress on the system to be like that. And sometimes you also hope that people would be objective or honest, or maybe I don't know if he misrepresented, but either way, it can be very unpleasant.
It tends to be somewhat more civil.
So fighting is the ultimate way of resolving the conflict?
It's a good question.
Is it the ultimate way of resolving a conflict? Well, I mean, it depends what you mean by ultimate. Obviously, if you can't resolve something through reason, then it does devolve into violence. That's what happens. I mean, you could say that's what happens with war, and you could say war is the ultimate. I mean, it's not the first thing, but ultimately, war only happens when you don't have rational parties. Rational parties don't have conflicts. If you have a political philosophy based on reason, like, say, objectivism, capitalism, individual rights, it's hard to imagine something escalating into the level of war. I mean, you essentially have to have extreme misunderstandings. It's hard to imagine a mere misunderstandings escalating the level of war with that sort of society, but we're very far from that, so it's no surprise. But anyway, yeah, ultimate, this interviewer guy, I mean, his philosophy is so far from reason that, his terms of dealing with people is violence, is coercive force. I mean, that's what he believes in. He believes it's the way of dealing with things. Jordan's much more individualistic. He's not an objectivist. He has met Jan Broek, and some objectivists. Hope we get to have some more interaction with Jordan. But yeah, let's keep going.
It's a good question. The ultimate way of resolving a conflict is...
Jordan likes to say it's a good question. I could say that too, but he's trying to be very, pensive. Sometimes I think he uses a little bit too much when he can't say something. Maybe anyway. Let's keep going.
To negotiate for peace, if you can manage it. But if you can't negotiate for peace, then what are the alternatives?
Right. I mean, the way I think of it is if this leftist guy comes up to you and he says, you know, we're going to rob you, we're going to murder you, and the other person says, or no, actually, you go up to people, two people go up to each other, one's whatever, either a leftist, whatever, totalitarian, doesn't, you know, whatever variety, doesn't matter. Two people go up, and I say to you, I said, here's the deal. Don't violate my rights, and I won't violate your rights. And they flat out say, no deal. Okay, so they've told you right from the beginning that they intend essentially to rob you, to murder you, to do whatever. And they openly declared that to you when you gave them the choice. As far as I'm concerned, at least morally, I mean, not politically, not legally, but this person has given you an open license. I mean, to take any preemptive action. Now, it doesn't work in society, but let's say it was morally, I mean, it gets very complicated politically because obviously, especially with individuals, there's all kinds of, but let's say we're just talking about two different countries. It's essentially a declaration of war. If you do that, you know, it's like, if one country says to the other, we have no intention of attacking you, and the other one's like, oh, we will. It's like, it's like, why would you not agree to these terms? Anyway, let's go.
How do you explain so many men, so many young men follow you, listen to you?
Because they need encouragement. And they need a reason for growing up. And I encourage them and give them a reason to grow up.
What are you?
It's better to grow up than to stay immature.
Are you a father figure?
Sometimes.
A prophet, in a way, a guru?
A prophet, please say you're a prophet or a guru. I really hope you fall into that trap. I really hope. You're that dumb, because I'm dumb.
Guru,
I don't believe that I'm a guru.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that you can be a guru and tell people to take their own
I am the Jordan Peterson, okay? Let's go.
way. You know, I'm asking people to develop a vision for their own lives and to adopt the responsibility for that, but it has to be something that's personal.
But do you feel responsibility then?
Yes, absolutely. Fundamentally, this is supposed to be helpful to people.
What if I told you that you're playing on young men's distress to make all that money?
That accusation has been leveled at me before. I don't know how I'm playing on their distress, exploiting it or helping it.
The fact
Look,
is,
I've
a lot
said
of
right
people
from the beginning that I'm an evil capitalist. I don't make any bones about it. I'm not ashamed of making money.
I don't think the interviewer was going after the money part, although I could be wrong. I think he was going after the idea of he's trying to make Jordan and the people he's trying to motivate into emotionalists in a sense, you know, just playing on anger or whatever, you know, or dissatisfaction, whatever. You know, of course, emotions are can be legitimate. Obviously, I'm like, what the hell? Are people supposed to not have emotions? But I think that's generally the direction they try to push things into, emotionalists or something. The irony is that these totalitarians, especially the leftists, I mean, their ideology is practically emotionalism. It's all about feelings. So how do you feel? And even when it comes to animal rights, they talk about sentience. And I've actually learned that sentience does not mean reasoning ability, which people tie to self-awareness, is kind of how I heard it being used in the past. It actually means like ability to sense, in the sense of an ability to feel. In other words, these people, they say animals have rights because they can feel pain and all those kind of things. I mean, the left is just, I mean, they are the emotionalists. So it's sort of ironic that they seem so often to pin what they are in so many different ways on their opponents.
It's very hard to make money.
Can I ask you bluntly how much you make?
I make $80,000 a month.
I'm a little surprised he actually says I don't know if I'm surprised or not. But yeah, I have heard. I think he makes like he's the most of anyone on Patreon. But there's actually a recent video just posted a few days ago. They need to get off Patreon because they start kicking people off, like Sargon, because he used an inappropriate word on somebody else's YouTube channel, not even on Patreon. So Patreon didn't even follow its own rules, its own terms. So even though Sargon maybe shouldn't have used the word, it's dangerous that Patreon would not follow their own terms. That makes them very unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen. But generally, you should not be using Patreon. You should not be using any of these services. If you're serious, you should be using what is called a merchant account, or you have a real account. I mean, you should be taking Visa or something like that. Their Visa is not a social engineering project. Okay, MasterCard, whatever. You get a real merchant account with a bank, you get the payment processor thing set up, blah, blah, blah. You do it that way, okay? And that's the right way to do it. I was actually going to tell Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson to do this, and then when I heard about it, Sargon of Akkad, and then I watched this video, and it turns out they're already doing something like this. So we'll see if they have, I'm somewhat familiar with, I have some knowledge of the IT solutions, but that you could also build into that if you wanted to host yourself and whatnot. But we'll see what they come up with. They're going to announce soon. Anyway, let's keep going.
On Patreon, my book is selling about 20,000 copies a week. I have royalties that probably amount to something approximating $1.50 on each of those. The tours garner about $35,000 to $50,000 an evening. I have a business that's generating, I don't know, something in the neighborhood of $200,000 a month for me personally.
I'm curious if the 200,000 is all of those things aggregated, or he's saying in addition he's got 200,000, a business pulling in 200,000. That's some serious money if he's pulling in 80,000 a month plus 200,000 plus whatever 30, 40,000 for whatever these speaking engagement things are. I mean, this is some serious earnings. Generally, people that intellectuals do not make a lot of money, especially the better ones, unfortunately, because the world you can get into it, but I can make a video just on this topic. But I wonder if he started making the 80,000 a month and then he put it into some rental property or something that's making him 200,000 a month. I don't know. Anyway, let's finish this up.
There's some other smaller sources of income than that.
Then you are making a lot of money.
Yes,
out of this.
I certainly am, and so are a lot of other people.
All right. Well, they're done. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed getting some further analysis, getting someone to share some thoughts from an objectivist perspective. Jordan Peterson is not an objectivist. I can make some videos on what objectivism is, but I want to just get my brand out there, get my views out there. I haven't been able to publish anything in quite a while because of personal life issues going on, and I've also been thinking about what I want to do as far as what I want to be, what content I want to be creating. But please subscribe at the very least. Hit the bell to get more videos, and also if you want to support me, go to aristotleofamerica.com. Thank you.